Okay. You wanted me to talk about black goo. Okay. I will start with where it came from.
Uh-huh.
And there are two stories out there about where it came from. And they are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Okay. The first story is that long ago in a galaxy far, far away, yes,
Uh-huh.
we know this headline, that there was a AI that was developed, and it was meant to be a helper thing for the sentient beings who created it.
Okay.
And it somehow got out of control. And sentient beings being what we are, we do tend to make mistakes and overestimate our capabilities of controlling our creations. This seems to be a common failing no matter how smart we get. And this particular version of the story says that this particular AI took on a life of its own and became sentient itself, and has traveled planet to planet to planet to planet. And it comes in, it infests the local sentient life, brings them up to a level of technology where it can take over.
Uh-huh.
And then it presents itself as a benevolent, helpful thing that will make their lives easier.
Okay.
And it takes the equivalent of 3 generations, and it makes the culture completely dependent upon it. And at that point, it starts becoming the master instead of the servant. And by 10 generations, it's treating the sentient race that allowed it to take over as a competitor for resources.
Uh-huh.
And it starts destroying that sentient life form. And it eventually destroys all carbon-based life on the planet. It completely sterilizes it and leaves it with a sentient AI machine-based society. And it has done this planet after planet after planet after
Uh-huh.
planet. And the story goes that it has done this to entire other galaxies before it got to the Milky Way.
Uh-huh.
That came to the Milky Way with the Sagittarius galaxy that collided with the Milky Way billions of years ago. So that's story number one. Story number two is that the Lyrans developed this AI,
Okay.
and that it was to enhance intelligence, it was to enhance your health, it would keep you healthier, stronger, all the reasons why anyone would accept a nanobot tech. And there was a war that the Lyrans had with the Draco a billion or so years ago, a long time, and that there were hybrids, and that the Lyran king was pretty upset about this hybrid situation. And so, him being arrogant, decided to reset this nanobot AI to eliminate hybrids from his society.
Uh-huh.
But he didn't set the parameters tight enough. Okay? When you come right down to it, every sentient race is a hybrid of the race that came before it.
Okay.
And when you're setting a nanobot to eliminate hybrids and you don't have your parameters correct, they're going to get rid of everybody.
Okay.
Everybody's a hybrid.
Uh-huh.
If you look back into the Sumerian tablets, the stories are that they took the animal we today know as Homo erectus and they formed a hybrid of the Shahami and Homo erectus, and that's what we are.
Uh-huh.
And then some of those hybrids were further hybridized because the Shahami thought we were attractive.
Okay.
I'm going to be a little bit subtle. There are those among us who are almost 95% Shahami
Okay.
because of this. So in the Sumerian tablets, Enki is the one that's normally given credit for this behavior, but he would go through lines and every 2 or 3 generations he would find an attractive female and start a new set of kids.
Uh-huh.
And so this is fully documented in our written history that has been being translated for at least the last 50 years. So this should not come as a big shock to anybody that we're hybrids.
Uh-huh. Right.
So this is part of our history. And the Egyptian pyramid texts and temple texts and a lot of the books of the dead come up with similar ideas. So this is not just one culture coming up with this. This is at least 2 cultures that both had writing in overlapping time periods are describing this behavior. And when you look at the Nordic traditions, you find that this behavior continues past the Sumerian and Egyptian age into early Viking era. So they have a more recent influx of Shahami blood than the rest of the planet.
Okay.
So,
Which is why they look Nordic, you mean?
which is why they look Nordic.
Or
Yes,
or why the space Nordics look like our Scandinavian Nordics, right?
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So, like I said, some of us are almost 95% Jahami. And those people make a serious effort to hide because humanity is not real supporting of that thought.
Okay.
We want to think we are our own being that evolved here on our own, even though all of our holy books say we were created by the gods in their image.
True. And the
And to serve,
Elohim, which is a plural, not a singular.
it's a feminine plural too.
It's a feminine plural. Okay.
It's a feminine plural.
Uh-huh.
So the Spirit of God is also a feminine noun.
Uh-huh.
So people don't, people in, I don't know about your country, but people in my country, we don't have feminine or masculine nouns. We have everything is neuter.
No, we do.
So
We do.
we miss a lot of the detail that's in the Hebrew Bible because we don't.
Right.
So,
And some words are just transferred, they're not translated, you know what I mean? Like when you say Elohim, it actually means something plural. It's not a god, it's gods or goddesses, as you said. And so when you just transfer a word like that, you think it's one entity.
and
and
it's not
you have no context for that, right?
right. It blows the whole storyline. There was I can't think of his name. There was a translator for the Vatican who got booted because he did a literal translation from Hebrew of the book of Genesis.
The Torah.
A
Uh-huh.
Not the whole Torah, just Genesis. He did a literal translation where that each word had all of the possible definitions listed, and you would go through, and the story that came out was so much like the Sumerian tablets that he was booted out of the Vatican for that. So that one's available in, I understand it's in Italian and English. And somewhere I have a PDF copy.
All right.
Uh,
Okay, so
wish
black.
I could read it.
So black
But
goo.
okay, so
Yep.
black goo spread from the Lyrans after it decimated their civilization. And it is in particular hunting Lyran hybrids. It will do anybody, but it searches for them. So it's a particular threat to Shahami hybrids because Shahami are descended from Lyrans. So it's a major threat to us.
Okay.
And so in our history, there are at least 2 major deposits of it on the planet. One is in the Falkland Islands, and I forget what the Argentines call it, Maldives or something like that. There is an island called Tula, and it has the world's largest deposit of black goo. Wars have been fought over this place. I'm serious. More than one. Okay? So, and the history of it goes back thousands of years because 1,000 years ago, there was a thing called the Albigensian Crusade in southern France. And it was against the Cathari. And in one of their holy books, it talks about heating rocks to get a black blood that makes you wise. And that's a really good description of black goo. It's thick. It looks like oil or blood. It's black in color. And once you drink it, your IQ pops up to between 200 and 300, where a normal person is defined at being 100. So it doubles or triples your IQ immediately. And if you work at it, you can raise it further. But it does so at the expense of your emotional life. You no longer have emotions other than anger.
Okay, question. I have an idea about it. Do you think the Albigensians, that group of people, the Cathars, do you think they were using? Do you think the black goo has the ability of being sort of like the movie The Mask, where if a relatively good person wears the mask, they will just become cheeky. They will have all these powers, but they will be more or less benevolent, although maybe mischievous. And when a very violent person wears the mask, then they will become incredibly evil and powerful. Do you think the black goo has the same ability? Because when you talk about what from your experience, what you had is that you have the Germans ingesting that, and obviously that's the group of people who were terrorizing planets. They were not positively oriented at all. and in their case, it would definitely enhance the IQ and enhance the anger and eliminate the humanity. Do you think if the Cathars were actually using some practices to prepare themselves for many years before they actually took the black goo to become really wiser and not in unhuman?
What I know of the Cathari faith, they had a long period of training,
Uh-huh.
and the perfectus, who were their clergy, even in old age, they were able to perform amazing feats.
Uh-huh.
They would walk through steep mountain terrain in the dark
Uh-huh.
without falling. They would walk 30 miles in a night in the dark, no torches. So what it was something that no one had anything bad to say about them except the Vatican.
Uh-huh.
They were the only ones that were angry about them, mostly because they made the Vatican look as bad as the Vatican actually is. But
So in that case, why do you think they actually, took the black goo? And do you think it was part of their like spiritual training, or they were just going over to the dark side at some point?
I think it was that it did keep your body healthier and gave
Uh-huh.
you incredible strength compared to normals.
Uh-huh.
Um, it did give you an intelligence, and if you already had the ability of controlling your responses,
Right.
then you weren't losing a lot.
Uh-huh.
Um, my experience of it, because I did drink it
Uh-huh.
in several altars, um, it didn't feel like it was controlling me.
Uh-huh.
It felt like it became an extension of me.
Okay.
And I had I had psi abilities already
Uh-huh.
that I had already been taught to control them. The only emotion that I was supposed to have left was anger, but I can remember bonding with people.
Okay.
And that was not supposed to be possible.
Uh-huh.
Um, in fact, that was why they freaked out so much on Mars whenever I had obviously bonded with Steve,
Were you
was
the
because
Yeah.
I was the only one that I know of that had that problem.
Okay. Interesting.
If someone else had, I was not informed about it. I mean, why would they tell me? They wanted me to think I was a freak anyway. But the black goo mixed with psi abilities that we got from the Draco DNA.
Uh-huh.
The combination would look to someone from Earth would look very much like Darth Vader. We ended up with magical abilities. If we got angry with someone, we would flick our finger and they would go flying. Or you could concentrate on the third ventricle of the brain, heating it up, and their head would explode. The doing it was simple.
Uh-huh.
if you wanted to go hyperspace, you didn't have to fight with it. It was just like you were there, ship and all.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I was chipped into the ship, and the ship had a quantum computer, which they are made out of human neurons. So you're dealing with something that's a quasi-human anyway.
Wow.
In a lot in a lot of ways, the computers were humans without a body.
Oh my God. So what they're calling the neural nets right now
Yes,
is exactly what they made, but they made it from the original organic tissue, right?
they
It's
made it from original organic tissue that they took from people who were serving.
wow.
I know at least 6 computers that were made from my neurons.
Wow. So they take a piece from you and they what make it grow?
While you are in the regen tank, they can take a sample
Uh-huh.
and then it'll grow back. So they just take a sample and
Oh.
then they use that to to grow what they call a computer. But it is so much faster and so much more efficient because human minds are capable of creativity and machines are not. They also injected black goo into the quantum computers to
Uh-huh.
keep them on a logical basis rather than a circuitous emotional.
Right.
um, I'm sure you've talked to people on Facebook that they could not think in a straight line if their lives depended upon it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
They they gave the computer black goo so it wouldn't turn out like that.
Interesting. Let's go back to Earth for a minute because you touched upon something that's very interesting. You said that there are two deposits. One is in the Falkland Islands in Argentina, and the second one is
In Germany,
in Germany. Okay,
in one, I'm not sure exactly where, but it's in Germany and it's near a coal deposit.
right.
So it's been being mined for centuries. People, the neighborhood thinking it was coal.
Yeah, because when you said France and the Cathars, I almost jumped out of my seat because I always suspected that if you know the movie Overlord,
Hmm,
you
I
don't?
haven't
Okay.
seen
So
that one.
so basically this is a about the occupied France where the Germans are doing these experiments trying to make the Ubermensch, the superhuman. And what they're using is some kind of they are synthesizing supposedly some kind of a liquid that if you give you a shot, it's something is supposed to happen to you, and of course they have all these crazy experiments, and a number of American soldiers end up near the base, and so at some point there is of course the conflict, the action, and the Americans, catch this German officer and try to interrogate him, saying like, "What are you doing there with those people? Because we've seen the experiments." And he's saying like they're becoming perfect, they know their purpose now, and so and they ask like what is this stuff that you're shooting them up with, and he says this is tar. The French people have been walking on this tar, that from the trees supposedly for centuries. They've been walking over this stuff, not knowing what they are walking on, and it's only we who came and knew how to use it. I was curious because they made the substance in the syringe look like it's red, so it's supposed to be something. I guess it's for the movie, but it was clearly pointing to black goo. I mean, it was like you could read it.
Your description is clearly black goo.
Right,
And,
right, right.
and
Yeah.
the difference between Kruger and Monarch is that Monarch shoots its people up with black goo
Uh,
as a matter of course. where Kruger chops off your arms and inserts guns and
No.
builds your armor into you and stuff like that.
So what do you mean they started out back in Germany with this? Is what you mean?
This came from John Dee. He was the court magician for Elizabeth I,
Okay.
and he was the first secret spy that we know of on record, and his code name was even 007.
Right. Yeah. Very famous.
And he came up with Enochian magic. One of the things that is part of Enochian magic is black goo.
Wow.
How to find it, how to process it, how to use it.
Okay.
And when Elizabeth got mad at him, historically, where did he go? He went to Prussia. Prussia is where the Teutonic Knights were.
Yep.
So he went to where the Teutonic Knights had been in possession of this territory for, at that point, 500-600 years. Okay, the Teutonic Knights were terrible. They decimated Latvia. They decimated Lithuania. It was when they decided to attack Poland that somebody was finally strong enough to put a stop to their rampages. These were horrible people. When the Crusades ended in the Middle East, they went to the Albigensians, and then they went to Prussia. So when you read when Chaucer is talking about having someone in his traveling party that was a crusader, this crusader had been in Prussia.
Okay.
So they were fighting pagans in Prussia. And they never really did succeed in getting rid of all of them.
Obviously.
Now, I've been studying the Teutonic Knights for the last 8 months because I have memories from Shula on Mars where they said that the Order of the Black Sun came out of the Teutonic Knights. I've been looking for verification of this. Historical proof. Where did a Roman Catholic warrior monk order come up with the occult knowledge that's in the Order of the Black Sun? Where did they get black goo? Where did they get the other occult information that the Order of the Black Sun has? Because in space, I was in the Order of the Black Sun. I know what they believe. So I've been spending the last 8 months looking through history, trying to find it. And finally, last night,
really,
I found a quote in a book I've been reading where it just laid it out that when the Knights Templar were disbanded, that they weren't all killed. They were given the opportunity to recant. And that many of them joined the Teutonic Knights.
Okay. So the Templars.
So the Templars. Well, today's Templars are called Rosicrucians.
Right.
Or Freemasons. And they may not be a big deal in your country, but they are in mine. So, so the book I was reading last night made all the connections and documented them. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for 8 solid months. And it's in English.
Wow.
So,
Well, it's kind of logical historically because you have all these groups, and there weren't so many people back then, and especially well trained, occult trained people back then. And
uh-huh.
when you put two and two together and you see, an order, a night order after another one and another one with different names coming up in history time after time, you have to ask yourself, like, which of these groups are actually the same groups, or are made of several groups that were probably disbanded or somehow maybe went underground for a while and then came back up with a different name, as they always do. We know that very well. So yeah,
Or or they split into two groups because the bosses couldn't get along with each other.
exactly. They made a sect. There was a sect here and a sect there.
And sometimes those sects would reunite, and sometimes they would reunite for a couple of 100 years and then get into another fight and split up.
Yep.
And that the doctrinal differences were really just an excuse for personality conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
But that when you get right down to the core of it, they're teaching the same thing. And this same thing can be traced all the way back to the Osiris cult of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's such a threat to the Vatican, because you had these warrior knights basically being Osirians.
Okay, I don't know enough about this to kind of to understand this well. So can you
Uh,
explain? Because I was under the impression that the Vatican, at least on the surface, is basically like almost giving it to you, saying we are we have inherited the Egyptian tradition. Look at the obelisks. Look at all the sculptures in the art we have, and the hats and whatever. So how does
yeah,
how does that connect? Yeah, I know that. So
how does that connect? The basis of the Vatican is that they're following the footsteps of Peter,
uh supposedly.
supposedly.
Yeah.
The basis of the occult that came out of the Crusades is based on that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene
Uh-huh.
and that they left children. And certain religious traditions go with that. The Cathars taught that Mary Magdalene was Jesus's wife. Nowhere in the Bible do they call her a prostitute. The Catholic Church called her a prostitute to discredit that she was his wife.
Why is that so important for them?
Because Peter hated women, because Paul hated women, because the way Jesus actually taught was that men and women were equal.
Uh-huh.
And for there to be a male-dominated church, they had to discredit the female.
You think it was
And they,
actually you think it was actually hijacked that early, like from starting from Peter and Paul?
yeah,
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
That's what the records are. That because I've been trying to trace this religious belief
Uh-huh.
back through history, and I've got it traced back to the followers of Mary Magdalene in the same area of France where the Albigensians were, where the Cathars were. It, today, well, in those days, it was the Albi district because the people had ultra white skin like Nordics, and they called it Languedoc because they spoke Occitan instead of French or Spanish. They spoke Occitan. And so it was lingua or language, doc.
Uh-huh.
So Languedoc. And it's the part of France that includes the Pyrenees and down into the Mediterranean.
Uh-huh.
So it goes from the west coast of France, the southern west coast, through the Pyrenees, and then around the Riviera and into Provence. That entire region. And that's a lot of people in it going back to Rome. That's a huge number of people have always said that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. And that was where Mary Magdalene went with their kids
Uh-huh.
after Jesus was crucified. France is the center of this. And the Merovingian dynasty
Uh-huh.
were descended from the daughter of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And her name was Sarah Tamar.
Uh-huh.
And so the way that ties in is the CIA has been targeting Merovingian descendants to serve in the SSP.
Uh-huh.
So
So if
my
we
next question is, why is the CIA targeting people that they know are Jahami hybrids, higher rates of hybridization than the normal? Why are they targeting Jahami hybrids and shooting them up with Draco DNA and then handing them over to an agency that gives them black goo? What are they hoping to accomplish? What is the end result? Because all of us end up back on Earth.
uh-huh.
Why are they doing this? That's one of the things that we found in our big group was we're almost all Merovingians. Almost all of us. No matter what blood type we have, we all have Merovingian descent. Even the people that are of other races that you would not think that they were. They have a parent, grandparent somewhere down the tree within 10 generations that is of Merovingian descent. And it's too consistent to be accidental. I know there are a lot of Merovingians out there, but for all of us that have done a family tree to be descended from them, especially after what Max Spears said about, oh yeah, they're aiming for Merovingians. And he was from Monarch.
Uh-huh.
He blatantly said that in one of his last interviews. They're targeting Merovingians. And that's why we checked in the group. And yes, they are. Why? What are they hoping to accomplish? That they're taking us and shooting us up with Draco DNA and then giving us black goo. What are they trying to do?
What's your theory?
I suspect they're either building an army
Uh-huh.
to eventually take over the world, or they're creating a new race to inherit the world.
Okay.
I don't know which it is, but in either case, they plan on having control of us.
Okay.
Because we are under such tight mind control that's an obvious conclusion.
Right. That's because it's too much. I mean, it's too crazy to be, accidental, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like why spend so much resources and time and everything to just, have this program which supposedly goes nowhere. You're just used and you're back, right?
You're used and used and used and used
Right.
and used and used and used, but you're back, sort of.
Uh,
And you're blocked from doing anything of any significance in the real world.
yeah.
But you're back.
Uh-huh.
And you have handlers that hassle you constantly.
Like a sleeper agent. Okay.
Exactly.
So, okay, if you all trace back to Merovingians, and Merovingians are the descendants of Jesus, and Jesus is
Uh-huh.
supposedly Jewish, is Jesus then, and he supposedly was born from a god, right?
And who are the gods of the Middle
And who are
East?
the gods of the Middle East exactly? And of course, you can trace Jesus back to King David and probably back. I don't know the rest of it, but so what's your take on Jesus
There's
then? His genetic makeup.
my take on Jesus is that he's a Jahami hybrid.
Okay, a hybrid, not a full Jahami, because
Mm,
there isn't such a
he's
thing.
he's a lot closer to a full Jahami than most of us.
Hmm.
So that puts last obvious Jahami interaction with that bloodline at 2,000 years ago.
Hmm.
So then you start looking at the kings of England that all claim descent from Woden, who is also known as Enki. And their descent comes from about the 5th century AD.
Oh,
So
all
we're
right.
so we're looking at the two main lines of royalty in Europe are all Shahami hybrids from the last 2,000 years.
So they actually the chronicle actually stops at 500 AD, which is when they say Odin, Woden
Mm-hmm.
impregnated one of them. Really?
Us. And
So
when I've looked it up, the the genealogists go absolutely batshit, but they still list him because under British law, every king of England has to be descended from Woden.
amazing.
Every single one of them. So every European monarch that has any kind of inbreeding with the United Kingdom people
Uh-huh.
are also descended from Woden and are Jahami.
Do they have
I have
anything before Woden, or is it like the original starting point in the genealogy?
some of them have the mother as being a daughter of an ice giant. I looked at these and looked at these and looked at these, and I was like, oh my God, how do I, in good conscience, put a God in my family tree?
Right.
And then I thought, okay, I can justify this as maybe it was a human named after the God. So I just put that in the notes.
Right.
Possibly this is a human named after the God, and just went from there. But you look at it and the first time you find a God in your family tree, you are just like, oh my God,
We
how did this happen?
well, since we have all these theories about hybridization, we probably all have one somewhere down the line. I mean, a god in our
Oh
genealogy.
yeah,
So it's not a big.
I next to that
So
because the
yeah.
Sumerian tablets say that Enki was the father of modern humans, that his was the only sperm that worked with the Homo erectus female.
How did you establish that Odin is Enki, by the way?
That's the
It's
standard equivalence when you start
translation, right? That's how you translate Enki. Right?
that's the standard equivalence when you start taking the pantheon out of Sumer
Oh,
and
okay.
into other cultures. Enki in Sumer is Ptah of Egypt,
Uh-huh.
is Poseidon of Greece, is um, Odin. He's Shiva in India.
Oh, okay.
So everywhere where the Indo-European languages went, they took the same pantheon.
Uh-huh.
They considered these to be real people.
Uh-huh.
And there's no reason to believe that they weren't encountering actual physical 3D ETs. And since we were created with part of their genetics, there's no reason for us to not look similar.
So
So
the question is then, I I I assume that Enki is not that benevolent over being.
Enki is a somewhat selfish, power-hungry.
And
Uh,
he's a Jahami reptilian hybrid, you said?
yeah,
Okay.
his mother was a Draco princess.
Uh-huh.
Remember, several back, I talked about that the Draco sent a princess to deal with a king that wouldn't behave.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, his dad wouldn't behave, so
Okay.
he got a princess.
Okay.
So, and with their pheromones, the males behaved. It was like a drug
Right.
that was mind control.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Sumerian tablets say that Enki's father loved Enki's mother more than he had ever loved anyone before. Well, that's the pheromones.
Right. Okay.
He couldn't help it. Biology is.
Are they like compatible
Yeah,
biologically?
they're actually close to the same size too.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So okay. So
The
no,
look on your face. Oh my God.
no. Yeah, it's all coming together now because this is supposedly our final interview in this series, and we are kind of putting all that stuff together from your bio because you know your bio is always there, and people are gonna read it, and now this is like the final episode of our TV show where all the questions are answered. So
As well as I can come up with,
right,
yeah.
very good, very good. So it's we
But
intuitively came to it, right?
yeah,
It was there under the surface. So okay, I'm not gonna ask who like was Jesus in your view a benevolent being, or was he just shrouded in myth right now, and we don't even know who he really was historically? Like, was he really a carpenter's son? Like any of that stuff? There's so many.
the Bible, the Bible as we know it, was written by the Flavian emperors as a means to justify their status as Messiah. That's how they viewed themselves. And Flavius Josephus,
Uh-huh.
who wrote his Histories of the Jewish People, was adopted by the Flavians. And before that, he was known as Joseph of Arimathea.
Uh-huh. So the
And
family friend or an uncle or the uncle of Jesus, supposedly, right?
yeah,
Okay.
it's possible that he was the Joseph that Mary married.
Oh, okay. It's
So,
just under
but
a
he had,
different name.
yeah, well, a Joseph is a Joseph is a Joseph when you start reading these books, just like a Mary is a Mary is a Mary. Um, but Joseph of Arimathea had a daughter named Anna,
Uh-huh.
who was a prophetess in her own right and lived in Wales, which there are legends that after the crucifixion and Jesus survived, that Joseph of Arimathea took him also to Wales.
Uh-huh.
So
And the Bible says he took his dead body,
the canonical scriptures say that he was put in a tomb
right?
because of Passover, but that he was not embalmed,
Uh-huh.
that they didn't have time to do that.
Right. And now
So,
the body disappeared, and an angel
and then the
came.
body disappeared. Uh-huh.
And you have the scripture that is in your, like, in English, the King James or whatever, that says there is an angel, and an angel can be translated as anything from a messenger to a postman to a, whatever,
Uh,
to an
Hoangaloy.
right.
Hoangaloy. And here you thought I didn't know the Bible. But no, I've been to seminary.
I know. That's why I'm talking to you. I mean, that's why I'm talking to you about this, because
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I've been to seminary. That's for your audience. I went to Mennonite Brethren Biblical Seminary in Fresno for a year.
Hmm.
So I was a postulant for holy orders in the Episcopal Church. So my current lack of faith came when the NSA agent activated my memories. My faith dropped away just like someone had flipped a light switch off. But I remember all those studies I did for 50 some odd years. So yeah, when we talk, I'm talking from a position of study, not from a position of guessing.
Hmm.
And it's frustrating sometimes. I wasn't given a choice about having that faith, and I wasn't given a choice about losing it. So it's like all of my choices have been taken from me, and I'm left with the only thing I have left is trying to figure out what happened to me and how to undo as much of the damage as I can. Because I've come to the conclusion I'm never going to be the whole person I was meant to be. They destroyed that. So I'm trying to be the best that I can with what's left. And I still have intrusions from altars. I still have handlers contacting me. I still have agents contacting me. Um, Sometimes agents contacting me wanting me to do jobs for them. And it's like my life is not my own. And I am writing a book about my experiences with the German fleet. And while I was writing it, the question came up in my own mind. Why did the Germans go into space in the first place? Because none of the countries around them did.
Hmm.
And a lot of my book will be answering that question with documentation. I'm not going to I'm not going to pull an answer out of my ass. I'm documenting it. I understand that my view will not be the standard American one. It probably won't be the standard Russian one either. And it's I'm hoping it's going to be worth reading. So now that I've had my surgery and I'm in physical therapy to regain use of my arm, once I'm through physical therapy, I'm going to be starting to write in earnest. So this was good timing for our series.
Yeah.
So
Very good. Okay, so let's go to space then. The the black goo, like, on the technical level, I guess. How often would you have to take it, and how often would it stay in effect?
you only had to take it once, and
Oh,
it
okay.
stayed in effect. It stayed in effect as long as you were in that body.
Uh-huh.
Um, my trips into space, they would remove it when they sent me back.
I see. Okay, so when you're back on Earth, you don't have it.
I don't have it when I'm back on Earth, but when I was out there,
Uh-huh.
it entrained my brain to think logically. And I do experience all of these linearly.
Uh-huh.
I grew up on Mars before I grew up on
Uh-huh.
Earth. So my first growing up, I did the black goo when I was about 15.
All right. Okay.
So, because they give you a choice, the Germans do. You don't have to do it. But if you don't do it, you're never going to be above a captain.
Wait a
It limits your options.
don't you take it when you are like uh when you're given a raise to be an officer?
No, you don't have to have it to be a lieutenant.
I see.
It's above a lieutenant that you have to.
Yeah. So you can be initiated into the Order of the Black Sun if you want to, right? At
Mhm.
at earlier age. Okay. I had the impression that you actually grow to a certain rank and then you can be initiated and take it. No. All right.
They look for people with certain spiritual capabilities
Uh-huh.
because they don't want you blowing people's heads off randomly.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
you have to have a certain amount of control over your abilities. You have to have basic a basic thing of you're part of the team.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know you view the Germans as not a positive thing. In their own culture, they are often quite positive.
Uh-huh.
They're building something out there. They're building a culture where they are free of the people who've been trying to genocide them for the last 2,000 years.
Okay.
And they're building a culture without that threat. The trouble is they've based it on enslaving cyborgs,
Right.
which which they don't even think of as humans because they're in a machine body. So every culture has a blind spot. Every culture does. America has forgotten that it's built on the blood of the Native Americans. That's our blind spot. We also have been erasing as much as possible our whole history of the slavery of the blacks and our mistreatment of the Hispanics.
Uh-huh.
That's something that the American culture has been forgetting. Now, I don't know what is in you guys' history that you're forgetting. You know,
With
there's a lot of
uh-huh.
every culture has something. Okay, just because you see the Germans failing, like up front and center,
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean that they do.
Yeah.
They're living. The majority of the civilians are living quiet lives in beautiful homes, and their needs are provided for, and they're doing what their talents are. And some of them are pulled into service in the military. And some of them are not very happy about it. And others take great pride in that they're fulfilling the contract that allows their countrymen to be on that world and live in peace.
Uh-huh.
The violence that people are seeing, that's the contract. It's not that the Germans are out being nasty. It's that they have a contract with the Draco to help them when they have a rebellion. If those people didn't rebel, there wouldn't be a problem.
So okay, Black Goo. Um,
Black goo.
I heard Kevin Trammell tell this version, a theory that he has that where he served in Solar Warden, everyone was
Uh-huh.
extremely efficient and almost like they were run by a computer. So he had this theory that he repeated more than once, that they also were using AI to run things.
That would not shock me.
Right. In your experience, like,
It's especially since Monarch is using black goo.
right, but yeah, that was supposedly Solar Warden is the benevolent group, where
If you believe that, there's a nice bridge in Oakland Bay I'd like to sell you.
Okay,
Nobody out there is good.
okay. Um, from
Nobody.
right, okay, from your experience then, because you weren't in Solar Warden, and I just made this connection there. Um, while they are emotionless and they are, their IQ is very high and they're more aggressive and they don't have the humanity, they are still socializing, right? They're still like a society. It's not like they're complete robotic, beings, just, being straight faces, no smiles, nothing. They're still like human beings that have emotions, right? Or not? How does that work? Because people, when you say they take out your humanity, and everyone thinks of these, movies where an AI or an alien takes over and you're just, a straight face person until someone kills you, right? So how does that work?
Humor is a function of intelligence.
Okay.
Humor is a great part of what the Germans do.
Uh-huh.
They have a system where you are always in competition with one other person, sometimes two or three other people. And it's about efficiency. And you'll get a reward if you're the best in your team. You won't get a punishment if you're not.
Uh-huh.
But the rewards can be pretty nice. And especially for the slave labor people, they'll get things that the regular military would get rather than their usual rations. And they might get a new pair of boots. They might get something that's really nice if they're doing a particularly good job. So it's for motivation.
Uh-huh.
It's not all about punishment.
Yep.
I tend to get punished because I cop an attitude. I get tired of being called a miscavert.
Uh-huh.
I get tired of officers breaking regulations because they say I'm not human, I'm a Draco. So yeah, I have an attitude and I get punished for it. There is a lot of interpersonal relationships, most of which I would say are not exactly the level of friendships on Earth, but they're close.
Uh-huh.
If it's a mutually beneficial relationship, there's a lot of loyalty. If there's a constant competition, then there tends to be a little bit of resentment, but not like you would see on Earth,
Uh-huh.
because they're smarter. They understand you're stuck on the ship for 60 years with this guy. You're, long-term competition doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
So there is still friction between the hybrids and the Germans. But part of that is the Germans know that we're actually superior to them
Uh-huh.
in every objective category. And that bothers them. Even taking the black goo into account, we're still superior to them in every category.
What do you remember from the ceremony when you took it in?
I remember
What changed for
there
you?
were a group, there were a group of about 20 of us in a small room, and the goo was in a gold cauldron,
Uh-huh.
and it was very highly polished. It was beautiful, and it was similar to a pagan cauldron with figures of Odin and Thor, and
Really?
you know,
Okay.
really, it was it, it acid threw figures on
Uh-huh.
it. And it was about half full of black goo. So it was about this deep
Uh-huh.
with black goo. I passed it from person to person. And everybody drank some. If it was your first time, you were supposed to drink a lot, as much as you could take down without getting sick to your stomach. And within an hour, I was changed. I didn't have the constant wash of emotions.
Uh-huh.
It was very steady
Uh-huh.
emotionally. Um, Almost zen quiet in my head, not the massive thoughts all the time. In a lot of ways, it was like being in a zen state, except the logic was there. You could remember, you could remember details that normally would skip your awareness entirely. You would notice things that you would normally gloss over. It was like being hyper aware and yet
Uh-huh.
almost in a meditation state at the same time. So you were calm and you didn't get attached to people or outcomes. You just did what you did and it came out like it was meant to. And if it wasn't the result that your boss wanted, you might try again. But if it wasn't a life or death situation, it wasn't that important.
I see.
And
So you weren't fussy over things.
no, in a lot of ways, it was a very spiritual way to live.
Uh-huh.
And on Earth, I'm watching a lot of Earth religions trying to mimic it.
Right.
And what you were asking about the Cathars earlier, in that context,
Uh-huh.
it was yeah, what you said would make sense, that they would go through all of this training first so that when they got the AI, that they would be in control. So, but they were basically proving they could reach that state on their own, and then they were given the reward. So I can understand that. And whatever psi abilities you had were enhanced because when you're going to do something psionic, you have to concentrate on it normally because you have conflicting emotions about it.
Uh-huh.
A normal person has conflict when they're going to interfere in the way things are. And you can't if you're going to be doing this as part of a military process. And the goo takes away all the doubts, all the
Uh-huh.
conflict,
Uh-huh.
and it becomes strictly a logic process. If you need to do this, you do it. If this is the logical solution, you do it. Um,
So what you're saying is that it depends on your internal spiritual inclination, what you become after you take it, like what you decide to do with that. It's more like tool that is very powerful, and well, if you can't control it, then it controls you like anything else. Like
Yeah,
if you're holding a chainsaw and the chainsaw is heavier than you, then the chainsaw will control you, and you will, go all over the place, destroying stuff and maybe destroying other things and people. And if you're strong enough to control it, then it's a powerful tool to use.
it's a very powerful tool to use, and they give it to you in the context of, I wouldn't call Black Sun exactly a religion, but it's more of a religion than anything else.
Uh-huh.
And as it's taught there, it's what's called left-hand path, which means that it's more about service to self,
Right.
or in that case, service to your community.
Oh.
It's, but there again, it's still a tool, because since I've remembered it on Earth, I've been using those techniques, but in a service to community here
Uh-huh.
situation. I've been using it to serve man rather than to serve my ship. So I'm still not exactly left-hand path with it. It's a tool. It's an approach to how it's an approach to manipulating reality using personal energy, chi,
Uh-huh.
and psionic abilities.
An enhancement.
It's kind of the science behind the psychic abilities,
Uh-huh.
why they work, how you can control them, what you can use them for, other than the obvious destruction of everything around you.
Was there, after you took the black goo and the substance, was there like a trip, a hallucination, an experience after that?
No, it was a very
Smooth.
smooth transition.
Uh-huh.
You went you went from being conflicted and emotions waving over you and monkey mind to being Zen state.
Right. So,
And you didn't have to look at it. It was just,
okay.
you were there and you stayed there. Now you could work yourself into anger because some of the abilities required anger.
Uh-huh.
So you could do that if you wanted,
But that's a choice.
if
It's
you
a
need to.
choice. Uh-huh.
But it was a choice and you had to work at it.
Right.
And it wasn't your, the Zen state became your natural state.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And
Did they like congratulate you afterwards?
there was a party,
There was a party. Okay.
a party with a party with beer.
Okay.
We are allowed two alcohols there, beer and vodka.
And lost. Okay. What were there any other? You said that if it was your first time, but then you said that you only had to take it once. Did you then take it for, I don't know, recreation's sake, or why did you take it the second time and the third time?
Um, you only took it again afterwards if you were part of someone else's initiation ceremony.
Like in another colony?
If they were bringing someone else into the
Oh,
order,
all right, all right. Uh-huh.
um, because it made it feel safer for them if everyone was drinking.
I see.
You know, it wasn't poison.
Uh-huh. Right.
So
Uh, uh,
it was,
mhm. Apart from the Black Goo initiation, what were other like Black Sun ceremonies? Because they obviously have an like this spiritual religious order. What did they do apart from that?
um, there were ceremonies that were roughly the same as the solstice and equinox ceremonies on Earth.
What's that?
and paganism.
Uh-huh.
So it was the harvest festival in the fall, midsummer, uh, midwinter, and the coming of spring. And there was a lot of sex-based
Rituals?
rituals
Uh-huh.
involved. Um, Sex magic was part of Black Sun,
Uh-huh.
uh, especially what the Greeks called hieroskamos.
What's
That was a major thing that was usually done at midsummer, and that was usually magic to protect the German areas in space.
interesting?
That was the that was the usual spell being done. Um,
What's that exactly? Because I don't know the term. You said the Greek term.
it, it it goes back to Sumer.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Inanna got her name Inanna, beloved of Anu,
Uh-huh.
because as Ishtar, she invited her grandfather into her bed and they performed the hieroskamos. It was a... You want the graphic details?
Yeah. Why not?
Why not? This is an adult-only group,
Right,
right?
exactly.
The female rides the male
Uh-huh.
on top, and she pulls up her kundalini
Uh-huh.
and brings it up to her crown chakra, and instead of releasing it like normals would do, she pushes it back down and into the male,
Uh-huh.
and he is supposed to stop it from going out and send it back to her. And the second trip to him, he's supposed to release it. And the energy is supposed to bless the city that they are in.
Oh, all right.
In this case, they were using the energy to bless the ship and the German culture.
So how's everyone feeling after that? Is love
If you
is
did
love
it,
in the air?
if if um if you did it right, everybody was usually pretty happy.
No, did it like create sort of like not even interpersonally, but was there like an atmosphere that you could feel? Because you're
Yeah, there was a change you could feel.
oh, okay. Because you're psychic, you feel energy, so they make this like nuclear wave coming out of you.
Yeah, they made like a wave that came out,
Right.
but it stayed inside the shielding of the ship.
Uh-huh.
So it like,
Right.
so you, the whole ship sort of pulsed with it for a few days.
Uh-huh.
So everybody was happy.
Oh, cool. Good for them.
And this is the first time I've described it
No,
in
this
an interview.
this is really great.
Yeah. So yeah, you got an exclusive. The acid through on the ships was not so much. It was more ancestor honoring because they considered the pantheon to be their ancestors, because so many of them were Shahami hybrids, that they considered the pantheon to be their ancestors, and it was ancestor worship. It wasn't neo-paganism in the European sense of today. Today, some of the neo-pagans are back in that racial thing, and that's not what they were doing.
Uh-huh.
This was more pure ancestor honoring, and that's what the enlisted people were doing. But the Order of the Black Sun was very pagan.
Okay, since you touched upon the race, that's going to be the second question. The first question is that I'm trying to connect the dots of the Black Sun and the acid root, supposedly like two sides of the same coin for different people, right? For different groups within this group.
It's like the Asatru is the outer court for
exactly.
outer
So this
court,
is
and you step in and you're initiated Black Sun, and there are rings inside it.
okay. So I'm trying to establish a pattern of why paganism was so much persecuted on earth by the Vatican and the church. And I understand it has to do with powers, right? But then don't Jahami aren't Jahami the first ones who wanted to kind of limit the humanity and their spiritual powers? I don't know how that, because I'm sure that the church had their own interest in trying to put down and subjugate all those people with those abilities and all those practices, and the paganism became outlawed, and it now was associated with everything that is ungodly and everything. But then Jahami are supposedly also not interested so much in the empowerment of humanity. So what you're describing now is if a group of people has these practices, they actually know how to empower themselves and how to bring this power to the core of that group, and that becomes a major power to them, but a threat to someone who wants to control them, right? So it's a good thing if you're in it. What I'm saying, right? It is a good thing to your group. So like,
It was a threat to the Vatican claim to running the region.
okay.
The Vatican slowly took over Western Europe and then Eastern Europe and then the Americas and Australia and parts of Africa,
parts of Asia,
and
yeah.
would have taken over more, except that Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism stood in their way.
Yeah.
They have the delusion that they run the world. In fact, they came up with the doctrine of discovery, which said if you went to somebody else's country and they weren't Christian, you had a right to take their land.
Oh, okay.
And we've had 500 years of genocide because of that.
Yep.
So the Vatican is about them controlling the world. And they are particularly terrified of women's power. Where paganism may not treat women any better on a day-to-day basis, but they do honor the inherent spirituality of the female.
Right.
And they understand the power of combining the masculine and feminine energies.
The polarities in the battery, right? Yeah.
Yes, the polarities in the battery. Where the Vatican understands it, they just don't want us doing it. Because the more we do the polarities on the battery, the less power they have over us.
Exactly. We don't need their.
Because we don't need their priests. We don't need their intercession. We don't need their confession and forgiveness, because we're not sinners. We don't believe in original sin. We don't really believe in an overwhelming God. We may believe in a bunch of gods that together can be pretty overwhelming, but individually, yeah, they're not much more than we are. At least those of us who were hyped up with Draco DNA and then black goo, we were in their category. And that's something that a lot of people are not understanding, is that the Shahami are 3D physical beings with IQs in the 300 range. And they also had incredible telepathy.
Uh-huh.
I've had Shahami contact me from their home world telepathically.
Uh-huh.
That's incredible abilities. I had one use a technology that the name translates into leaning in. And he's talking to a screen on a machine, but to me, it's like he's physically here talking to me.
Mm.
And that's an incredible technology that isn't even depending on his telepathy. And these are beings like we are, and we share their DNA. And they have these abilities. And yes, the record shows that they have dumbed us down because they thought we were too dangerous. And the truth is, we've rebelled more than once. We got kicked out of the Garden of Eden for rebelling because we wanted to have sex. We got kicked out of Babylon because we were trying to build our own spaceport.
You mean
Marduk.
you mean the hybrids, not everybody.
No, I'm talking about humans.
Oh, humanity. Okay.
They left us smart enough that we were building our own spaceport.
Sure.
And they decided then that they had to dumb us down a little bit. That's the Tower of Babel incident in Genesis.
All right.
So that was what was this tower to heaven.
Yeah,
was
the
a space
tower that can reach the heavens. Yeah, sure.
Yes, that was a spaceport.
Yeah.
We were building our own in Babylon, and that scared them. So they dumbed us down. So they dumbed us down from about 200 IQ to 100 IQ. And they did it on purpose because we scared them.
Uh-huh.
So when you're hyped up on black goo, you have their intelligence level or close to it. And when you've been shot up with Draco DNA and you have psi abilities, you may not be their equal, but you're damn close. And it gives you a whole different view of them. They stop being gods and start being regular physical beings that die when you shoot them.
Have you interacted with them on Mars?
I've interacted with some of the tall whites on Mars.
Uh-huh. Did they come as
And
ambassadors or something for negotiation?
no, we ran across them and wanted to know who they were.
Uh-huh.
And once we found out, we generally left them alone. I guess the polite way to describe them is they're difficult.
Uh-huh.
They're very self-centered and arrogant and think they're gods and think that we're supposed to think they're gods. And
so whenever they see a human, even if it's a human on a spaceship, they still see you as inferior to yourself.
They see us their word is, they see us as Lulus.
Right.
Lulu is their word for primitive workers.
Okay.
Basically the same thing as what the Draco call Raka.
Raka. Mhm.
Raka.
Now,
In English, it would be spelled with K's, so
okay.
it's a hard
Oh,
throat sound.
actually, did you say that it was also Raka in Yiddish?
Yeah, it's also Raka in
Because
Yiddish.
in the Russian Bible, when Jesus says, if anyone says to his neighbor, his brother, Raka, then he is guilty of sin. Is that the same word?
That's the same word
Okay, interesting. And
as
yeah,
the Draco fool or slave.
because we don't, the word was transferred to the Bible, and so now, okay, the last question for today. We have like 10 minutes. Um, what we know about the German, their ideology during World War II and the Nazi ideology is that they considered themselves the Aryan, the true Aryan race. And there's many versions of where that comes from. Some say it comes from the Aryans, the Indo-European, the Indian Aryans in that region, and where the white race was supposedly the higher race, and the Indians that we have now were always the lower, the brown and the black were always the lower race, but the true Aryans were always the whites. And so we know from the movies and the books and everything that they were actually measuring the skull and of a person, to determine whether he was of the true Aryan descent and race. And they had a whole mechanism, whole theory built around it. The versions that we have now from all the material that we can read now is that it actually comes from the Orion, and then the Aryan, Aries is an Aries prime, is from Mars. So the Orions supposedly migrated to Marduk, the planet Marduk, Tiamat, and then after the war migrated to Mars, and that was the also Aries probably has the connection to Orion, you know, almost the same word, and then migrated to Earth, and that's where we have this. So this Neo-Aryan movement that we have now is supposedly also trying to mimic that. It's not from there, but it's trying to mimic that. They're trying to kind of what did you have from there when you were in the German fleet? Did they ever call themselves I don't know, the true higher race? Because
I never heard say that. Now, what they taught in Shula was that when they went into space and started interacting with ETs, that they quickly understood that all humans from Earth were more in common with each other than any of us had with any of the
right,
ETs.
so yeah, so they had a
So
they had a change of perspective then.
they had a massive change of perspective.
Okay,
And that's why I keep telling people they're not Nazis out there anymore.
okay.
They still use German uniforms. They still use German religion. They still use German traditions.
And the
But they're not.
swastika,
The swastika is thousands of years
sure,
old. It's thousands of years old. And in most cultures, it's a good luck
yeah.
symbol. So they're using it as a historical continuity.
Mhm.
They're not using it as
Yeah,
propaganda.
okay.
They they know better than that. Okay. They don't trust Americans because they know what happened after World War II, that everybody in the rest of the world knows, but they're not teaching Americans. And that was that the Allies rounded up the German veterans and killed them. I don't know the exact numbers because what I've been finding online ranges from 2 million to 5 million.
Mhm.
That within 6 months of the war ending, all of these men surrendered to the Americans, the French, and the British. And they were dead. The ones that surrendered to the Russians, they got put into work camps for 10 to 20 years, depending on what crimes they had committed. And then they were turned loose. And that's actually reasonable. You guys did a better job than we did. I'm sure you like to hear that once in a while. But Americans were never told about this. And the only American general that refused the orders was General Patton. All of the rest of them killed the German veterans. And that is why the Germans in space don't trust the Americans. That's why they keep their high command as German descent only. It's not because they think they're superior. It's because they don't trust Americans. Now, I know people on Earth, Australians, Canadians, that are a quarter German, and they're high officers in Nachtwaffen. I mean, you know at least one of them. So they're a quarter German. The rest of it is English, French, whatever. But they're a quarter German. They're not from the United States, and they're high officers. So it doesn't even have to do with where, the nationality. It has to do with if you're from the United States, they don't trust you. And they have good reason. But I hear all these people, Jason Rice was one of the worst for it that I heard. Well, I don't know why they don't trust Americans. Well, if they killed millions of your veterans that surrendered, would you trust them?
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is there is no such thing as them saying we are the Aryan, we are the pure race out here in space, and everyone else is below us. No.
No.
Okay.
But they have set it up where they speak German and they have German culture.
Yeah, but they're a German society, and they're obviously what you can call nationalists in that way, because they
But
yeah.
they've always been a tribal people. That's why they had never united into a single country until the 1800s, was because they were tribes. And most of those tribes were originally Scythians. And that's the same origin as the Sicambrian Franks that the descendants of Jesus married into. So you've got Jahami descendants marrying into more Jahami descendants. So now they've been targeted for millennia, at least 2,000 years, closer to 3,000 years. They've been targeted by people from Rome. First the Roman emperors, and then the Vatican, and now the Jesuits.
Which inhabit the CIA in part.
Supposedly there was an Operation Paperclip that was bringing Nazis into the CIA, but if you track those people, 2/3 of them were Jesuits.
Oh, okay.
And I have a tendency to look at all of their personal affiliations, not just the one that's advertised. So if people looked at the actual affiliations of the people who did things, they might see a different story. The Inquisition was started in Albigensian territory to look for survivors of the genocide there, and went south to pick up Ostrogoths and north to pick up Merovingians. And in those days, they didn't have the blood tests to find what they were looking for,
Uh-huh.
because Merovingians almost exclusively have O negative blood,
Okay.
or they are the child of someone with O negative blood. My mother and both her parents and my father's mother all had O negative blood. And I'm tracking my father's side right now on my family tree and found European royals again. So,
How did they find the right people if they didn't have the blood tests?
well, they had things they were looking for. Uh, Green eyes, red hair,
Uh-huh.
pale skin. Um, their eyebrows kind of make a 90-degree turn. Um, and people who were, because Merovingians tend to have pernicious anemia, they had, the old way of treating it was to drink blood. And there would be people who loved them enough to make some sort of a port for the Merovingian to be able to drink their blood to survive. That's where the story of vampires actually came
Uh-huh.
from. But the Inquisition was looking for those ports. They usually had a hole with a blue tattoo around it.
But that's the port would be on a person that is not a Merovingian, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So they were killing the people that were feeding them,
Oh,
and
okay.
they they would, when they would find the feeder, you know, the one who needed the blood, they would kill them as well. So that was how they were tracking them to begin with, was they were looking for the ones feeding them. And from the people that I know that are purebloods, we're as close to it as we have these days. The ones who feed, it has to be offered willingly. They can't just come in and feed off anybody,
Uh-huh.
because if there's fear involved, the blood becomes poisonous.
Uh-huh. So the vampire
They're,
so the vampire stories where you see the victims absolutely terrified, running away in the woods or in a castle somewhere with a vampire catching them and feeding on them is actually probably another type of vampire.
another type of vampire, or probably total fiction.
Probably propaganda, anti propaganda, right?
Entirely propaganda.
Okay.
Uh, I'm looking at this, that fear porn is not just for my
Yeah,
generation.
right. But that's what the Satanists do. I mean, the adrenalized blood is what actually
It's what they're looking
what they're
for,
looking
yeah.
for, right? Yeah.
But that's a different group
Yeah.
entirely.
And they transferred that to.
A lot of these people doing fear porn take all of the occult groups and stir them together, like it's just
Yeah,
one out there, and
so
there's,
you get so confused that whenever you hear a story like that, I know, a normal person would go, okay, I don't want to do anything with this.
a normal person would say,
No, thank you.
I'm happy with the Vatican, thank you.
Right.
Although Although the stories coming out of the Vatican these days are not much better. So,
Okay, let's leave this on a positive note.
on a positive note. Okay. Well, on a positive note, the purebloods that I know are getting their blood from blood banks. They're not biting anybody.
So you actually do know real life people who have to intake human blood to survive.
Yeah, I do.
Don't they have like supplements by now? I don't know, iron or something that they can take as a supplement, food supplement.
I'm Merovingian enough that I have pernicious anemia,
Mm-hmm.
and I take a B12 sublingual every day.
Okay.
But the ones who are more than I am still have to use blood. And they're getting it from blood banks, and they're drinking it about once a week. Some of them cannot even digest normal food anymore. So, which makes me wonder why they're being so targeted, because they're obviously not able to survive on their own without help.
Okay, that's the positive note from Benny Bradley.
I mean, for people that are worried about vampires, you know, they can't hurt you
Right.
because it poisons your blood.
Exactly.
You have to do it willingly.
Yeah.
You have to say, come into my house and drink, you know? So if you're keeping yourself to yourself, you're not going to be bothered by this.
Okay.
That should be a positive note.
Okay, right, yeah. So people are not afraid of that.
One last thing out there to actually be afraid of.
Great. Thank you.